Welcome to the channel, The Art of the Force, channel dedicated to the art of Star Wars Unlimited. I'll be going deep on all things related to the artwork, the artists, and the designers of the Star Wars Unlimited game. I'm Will, designer of over 23 years design experience. This is my first collectible card game, most definitely got the bug. On this channel, we'll be diving deep into the stunning visuals that bring the Star Wars universe to life. From the heroes to the villains, the epic battles and iconic scenes depicted, each card tells a story through its artwork. We'll review and analyse the art, uncovering the techniques and inspirations. We'll explore the creative minds of the artists, compare different styles, and appreciate the incredible attention to detail that makes these cards true works of art. Whether you're a dedicated collector, a SWU player, simply a fan of great art, this is for you. So when we talk about the anatomy of design, we talk about all the different design elements working together in harmony. How they're laid out, the composition on the card, for example. And to start with, I thought it would be interesting for us to talk about the different versions, the variants of cards available. So you have the non-foil card, which you see on the far left here. You have the foil variant, where the image is foiled. You have the hyperspace, where the design is edge to edge, so you remove the frame. Then we have the hyperspace foil, or hyperfoil, which I will refer to it from now on. And also there's an event exclusive or an open play exclusive, where you will see a slightly different treatment to the border with the unique colour, which is normally a complementing colour to the artwork. There is also foil exclusive cards available. For example, this Sabine, which has that border accent colour treatment, but it's also a foil. So there are foil and non-foil versions of the event exclusive cards. So let's delve into the detail of the individual cards and the elements that live on those cards. I'm not going to go into detail about what each of these mean necessarily. I will give a very high level where needed, but if you're unfamiliar, quick Google is your best friend. So starting in the top left hand corner, we have the card cost. So this is the amount of resources you need to play this card. We have the aspect icons below that. So in this case, we have vigilance and villainy. Those are essential when building out a deck. You want parity between your base and leader and your deck cards, otherwise you'll be paying an aspect penalty. Then in the blue bar at the top there, we have unit, so that's the card type. Next to that we have ground, so we have ground or space cards, plus obviously some other variants which we'll touch upon. So then we have the name of the card, so in this case Count Dooku. To the left of his name you'll see a little icon, little star icon. This means that he's a unique unit, so you can only have one of these in play, so on the board, active, at a time. So you couldn't put 3 Count Dookus into play at once. Then, below that, in the red symbol there, we have the power rating. So in this case, he hits for 5. In the middle there, we have the traits. So in this case, we have Force, Separatist, and Sith. This again is where you have some parity with events or upgrades or other units. You may have Force units where you get extra buffs for either an event or an item that you add to this card, for example. Then to the right in the blue element there, we have the health or hit points. Underneath that, we have essentially the abilities of the card. So on the left hand side in the standard card, you can see we have shielded with an explanation of when you play this unit, give them a shield token. Underneath that, we have a when played action. So when played, you may defeat a unit with 4 or less remaining HP. On the right hand side, you'll see on the hyperspace variant, that's slightly more succinct. So they've removed the explanation of what shielded means. I'm not sure why, whether this is done to simplify the card. Personally, I think it's a nice touch. With the hyperspace being so focused on the art, it really kind of removes some of that visual noise and the focus can be purely on the art, which I think is a really nice touch. Then underneath the abilities box, we have the artist credited, which I think is great. It's lovely to see, as they should be, to really kind of get a call out here on the card. I think is fantastic. So great job, Fantasy Flight there. Really appreciate that call out. Then in the middle you'll see the holographic stamp. So this is a stamp of authenticity. For those familiar with that stamp, it's like a little X-wing you can kind of see, catches the light. This is obviously to kind of counter fake cards and to show that authenticity of the card. Then we have the card rarity. So in this case this is an R, which is rare. There are the following card variants. We have common, uncommon, rare, and legendary. Legendary being the rarest. There are also S cards, which I believe stands for starter, as those cards are part of the 2-player starter sets. Then finally we have the card number, which in set 1 ranges from 001 through to 252. Then from 252 onwards for hyperspace, they have their own individual numbers. So when you're collecting the set, for example, there is an order for these cards. They're aspect ordered. I personally have collected it in order with the hyperspaces in order, and I think it's just a nice way to be able to manage your collection. And I think it's just very briefly worth touching upon the image treatment as well. So the difference between the standard card, as you can see in the hyperspace, as mentioned before, the hyperspace cards, the art goes edge to edge. So you get a much more immersive, a much richer looking card visually. You can also see on the hyperspace the kind of lines that again correlate with that kind of term of hyperspace, which I think is really clever. And that again just sort of adds to the focal point being very central on the card. There's a few elements obviously been removed from the frame as well, as you can see. Some of those blue elements that kind of float on top of the black frame have also been removed. So it's super clean, super tidy version of the card. And I can imagine the conversation at FFG around how can we really showcase the fantastic art that's being produced for these cards. And I think the hyperspace does such a good job. Very light touch way of being able to pull the focus in to the art, remove the noise, and create essentially an extension of cards that are collectible within the set. So now we've gone over the anatomy of the cards, let's just go a little bit deeper on some of the design elements. So the use of primary colours, the yellow, red and blue, to hold that important information of card cost, damage and health points. I think use of yellow is really difficult when you're using it as a design element, especially if you have type laying over the top of it. So the font, for example, here is a very light font. It's heavy in terms of the weight, but then they've utilized drop shadow here just to make sure that like the legibility, even at arm's length or even on the table, it's super readable. So there's obviously a very conscious design decision there to make sure that those important numbers are super clear and clean, even at a distance. This is the hyperspace variant, but even still, the kind of core information is still the same as what you see on a non-foil card. The unit and ground and the name across the top, all super clear and very clean. The contrast is super high, using black type on white panels, for example. Ground is a little bit more difficult to read. I think unit as well, especially on cunning cards where the yellow again comes into play. The use of drop shadows and the strokes around the type just help kind of elevate the readability. And if you look a bit further down at the information panel, loads and loads of free white space, which I think again have no issues there. It's a very scalable template for them. They've allowed flexibility within that panel to be able to scale based on the amount of information they need to show. The box doesn't change in size, which when you look collectively at a handful of cards, makes sense. there's no need to create more of a dynamic panel at the bottom that adjusts based on the amount of information. I think consistency is key, especially if you're holding multiple cards in your hand. Reduces that cognitive load of different design elements on the card changing per card. In terms of like the secondary information here around like Rebel, the name of the card as well, those are nice and clear, super simple. Execution here is very high contrast again. So from an accessibility point of view, when we talk about accessibility, we mean the readability and legibility of text, for example, on coloured backgrounds. So in this case, they've gone very high contrast, almost black and white. They've used a very, very light tint of the aspect colour. So in this case, this is a green unit. You can see that it's a very, very, very subtle green tint to the main panel, keeping that contrast really high. As mentioned, people with accessibility needs, so people that may be vision impaired, cognitively impaired, needing to have super high contrast to make this an accessible game for them. So let's talk about the use of the accent colour here of green. Strong enough to make it very recognisable what aspect this card belongs to, which I think is super important. So they've used very, very strong tints and shades of the green. Never too light, never too dark. Again, kind of dialing up, not primary colours here, but dialing up those very, very strong core palette colours to make it very, very recognisable. Some of those smaller design details you see, like the little lens flares around the frame, the little kind of glints almost, as though they're kind of representing, again, that space aesthetic. I think are nice little visual touches. Does it add too much visual noise? I don't think so. Maybe in the future I'll do a design exercise myself, just out of interest, of redesigning one of these cards. See what the challenges are, to see where it could be refined even further. But in general, I think the use of very strong palette colours, again, just helps that glanceability, understanding that this is a green aspect card. When you have a handful of cards, you know, and you're building decks as well, or even organising your collection, making it super iconic and recognisable at a glance is really important. So I think all in all, it's a very solid design. The layout's very clear. Is it a clean aesthetic? Probably not. There's a lot of visual noise, as mentioned. You know, the primary panels there, the yellow, red and blue, feel like could be cleaned up. There's a little bit of background texture to those. I think they've maybe over embellished in certain parts of the design. Some of the little flourishes, the little Star Wars-esque strips and stripes as well that they've kind of injected into the design is an interesting art direction choice. But I think you could quite easily create a slightly simplified design of this card by just removing some of those extra little flourishes. Anything here I would change in terms of size, balance, visual balance? I don't think so. It feels like they have the hierarchy of information correct here. From the number sizes to the aspect icons, everything feels balanced and has a hierarchy of the order, essentially, of what you read the information. So when we talk about hierarchy, we talk about the visual balance, the size of elements. So if we just look at the text, Wedge Antilles being the largest text here, that's like primary within the hierarchy of information. Star of the Rebellion that lives underneath is a bit of a throwaway, right? It's a nice to have. It's a little, again, embellishment there, a little bit of scene or storytelling. Then as you go down, you have Rebel, which is clear, simple. And then the information panel, again, using sentence case, but then injecting some of the bolder colours, some of the bolder weights of type. So here you've got vehicle in black, You've got the +1/+1 in the primary colours correlating to the red and the blue. And then you've got the ambush. But like I say, a future experiment I will do will be to redesign one of these cards to really kind of understand the layout and the design choices that have been made. As for the art and the art direction itself, as mentioned, art's very subjective. Certain styles, certain compositions, certain palette choices resonate with different people. You already hear very jarring opinions of the art style. Some people really like the more comic book, loose art direction style. Lots of people prefer the more realistic looking. Star Wars universe is a very fondly thought of universe. People will always have very strong opinions about characters or environments or scenes from, recognizable movies or stories, or they have a very strong mental visual connection. Maybe that goes back to fond memories of watching Star Wars as a kid, or whether they're just a very, very passionate Star Wars fan. I think we'll see over the next few sets, again, building more variation, more different styles. Be interesting to see if they do anything visually different with the cards. It feels a pretty solid template to be able to build upon. I think one of the biggest things they will inject into future sets as well is just variation in art style. Bringing more artists, illustrators on board. Thinking about how far they can push the variation while still feeling like a cohesive and consistent art direction. I'm super excited about the future of Star Wars Unlimited. I'm really interested to see how each set will evolve, how they'll be set in different time periods within the universe, the different character sets. Obviously with set 2 coming out in the next few days, the Mandalorian theme running through that I think is super compelling. I think utilising a character like the Mandalorian and tying that into the TV show, to the current aesthetic within the Star Wars universe, I think will do nothing but elevate this game into the masses of the Star Wars genre. And that's a wrap. Episode 1 done. I hope you enjoyed that. Very foundational view of the design decisions, the anatomy of the cards. Something I wanted to do for episode 1, just so we can refer back to it in the future. Look forward to discussing art in more detail and the artists that have created a really compelling collection of cards. As mentioned, this is my first collectible card game. I'm super excited, really enjoying it. And just worth mentioning, I'm not affiliated to Fantasy Flight Games. This is purely fan-made content. And yeah, I look forward to creating more in the future. If you enjoyed this content, remember to subscribe. I will try and do weekly updates, and catch you on the next one.